Okay, so we'll go ahead and start with the first presentation from Stefan.
Thank you very much. It's an honor for me being here, and I would like to use the very first 2 hours of my talk discussing SCADA security. So what were we talking about? We're talking about control systems. In this very room, we have a control system which is working at this very moment, making this temperature inside very, very comfortable for us, which means you have somewhere a monitor system. Just a second. You got somewhere a sensor monitoring the temperature in this room. You got somewhere a controller, which is usually based in the basement of this building, which is then controlling the temperature via the climatization in this room. This is a normal controls process which is running more or less everywhere. On top of this, you got something which is called a SCADA system. A system which is aiding us as being humans to read the temperature of this room, to control the temperature. So there's somewhere a small panel at the door where you can adjust the temperature of this room to 23 degrees Celsius. In parallel to control systems, we have safety systems. Safety system is working in the same way as a control system. The only small difference is it's not taking any action apart from switching off the climatization. So if something's going wrong in this room, climatization is switched off, everything is a safe state. This is a control system. And control systems in the past were looking like this. You got the control system here, temperature, actuator, something which is called a programmable logical controller, a small intelligent device, and the SCADA system on top of this running some proprietary operating system from digital, for example, or VxWorks or something else. This is hooked up on a network. It's called a bus, a field bus here, profi bus, mod bus, connecting to other sensors, other actuators, more PLCs, some operator terminal, and even some more controllers. And there's a hierarchy, so you can build up now a network of networks. On top of this, you got somewhere a gateway. Some devices might be connected to 2 networks. You got somewhere more visualization services, or an engineering station for an engineer to interact with the control system, so making some debugging. And everything is connected to the world by a modem. This was the very nice world in the past. We had a revolution in between, starting something like 1990 to 2000, where our nice field bus was removed and moved to TCP/IP. And our digital world was moving to Microsoft. So the greedy controls experts were now moving to the IT world. They were using IT technologies, web servers on programmable logic controllers, web servers on SCADA stations, Microsoft operating system, and using TCP/IP. Version 4. In the future, we will have IP version 6, and I don't dare to think what's happening when IP version 6 is coming. I think this will be a security disaster for everybody of us. Even if some people believe IPv6 is much more secure, IPv6 is not tested yet, has not been shown in the field, we don't know the vulnerabilities. IPv4 is not secure, but at least we know that it's not secure. And on top of this, you got your office network with your data warehouse, a web server, and the connection to the internet. This is how a control system is looking today. If you go downtown and buy a car, you go and buy the car here, you say, I would like to have a blue BMW. The vendor is typing this in its computer. It's going in the data warehouse of BMW somewhere in Munich. It's going down to the production line, and somewhere here, you're getting your blue car. This is a direct connection. Control systems nowadays are connected to the internet. And then you get all the nice gadgets like SMS, PDAs, iPhone control for SCADA systems. You can buy apps for this. So you have the full office IT environment for control systems. Microsoft, iPhones, TCP/IP, emailing from the devices, and web servers. The whole office IT stuff is now in the controls world. They've picked the cherries, the nice protocols, the nice technologies from IT. What they've omitted is security. So how's this looking like? Those are control systems, electricity in Georgia, some oil in the Czech Republic, and this is supply and sewage of Athens. You can see Athens here. This is our control center, and if you see, a control center cannot be small. We have something like 200 screens in this control centers, and this control center is maintained by a small computer center of 2,000 PCs. How are control systems looking like? This is a standard Siemens PLC. Here you see the CPU, input outputs for the sensors, and you get an Ethernet connection here. This is the one which has been attacked by Stuxnet. Not this particular one, but this brand. This is another control system. It's called an oscilloscope. Ever seen an oscilloscope? An oscilloscope today is running Windows XP. And if you don't know that it's running Windows XP, how do you know that you have to patch it and run antivirus software? This is another control system. It has an Ethernet port here. It's a power supply. If you do a denial of service attack on this Ethernet port for 70 seconds, this device is dead. Dead means no power, nothing. We are running something like 2,000 of those devices, and I can't tell you what we have to do when all the 2,000 power supplies are falling out. It means I have to employ a student running around and plug the 220 volts connector back. This one I just introduced today, this is a controller which has an Ethernet port on the very bottom here, and I found this in my hotel room in this building. Since I'm a nice guy, I did not try to penetrate into this one, but I bet you this one is not secure. So here we are, we're living in symbiosis with control systems. If the control system of this building is failing, no nice temperature anymore, it's getting hot inside. No light, no electricity means no mobile phone, no fridging. So today, mankind are living in symbiosis with control systems. If the control systems are failing of a city, I think we're all in a very, very bad state. And control systems can fail. We have tested control system 2007 because we were interested in the security of control systems. I don't mind even report the results, but this has nothing to do with security. This has to do with blunder. If you take one of those devices, a PLC, and you use a tool which is called Nessus, Nessus is testing 20,000 known vulnerabilities. It's not made for control system, but it's made for office and network equipment. But you don't mind, an attacker doesn't mind. So we're running Nessus against control systems. We were telling the control system, hi, I am IP version 5 package. And if you're techie, you know there's IP version 4 and there's IP version 6. IP version 5 is not existing. So what should happen with the device? The device should say, don't know you, and I don't do anything. 17% of the devices, and we're testing 50 devices from different vendors, 17% of the devices were saying, oops, I don't know IP version 5, I stop. There were devices which were failing because you sent them different bits in the TCP/IP protocol, acknowledge, final, and reset at the same time. There were devices failing when you sent them and you connect to the web server and sent them a string of 8,000 letters. The device, again, was buffer overflow, was failing. This means, with very, very simple means, which are not APTs, those are very simple means, a very simplistic tool, you can bring down control systems. Bringing down control system means maybe your control process is still working, but your communication to the control system is completely dead. This is blunder of the vendors, and we were talking about vendors beforehand. My question is now, who has to do due diligence? Of course, I have to do due diligence to verify whether the control system I'm using are secure in a certain way. But I think all those 50 different vendors, they have to do due diligence, and I regretted that I'm not able to sue vendors to tell them, produce me something secure. If I take back my BMW is coming inherently with the brake. So if I push the brake, the car is stopping. This is something which is part of the product. Safety is part of the car. At the moment, we don't have security being part of equipment. The vendors here are thinking of what? Functionality, usability. We're living in the controls world, availability, and maintainability. So all those IT things, maintainability, availability, usability. Where is security? I think the very first step which we need is we need to convince vendors that they ship off products which are inherently secure enough that we do not have those blunders anymore. But why should we worry? Is this really an issue for us? There we go. Attacks on control systems are happening since 1984. This was when the CIA was slipping some weird control system to Russians and making a gas pipeline exploding. So it has nothing to do with Stuxnet. Stuxnet was not the very first big cyber war. We had this in the past. Daimler Chrysler was suffering because the Sotop worm was bringing down the plants. Hospital equipment was infected with Configure. Can you think what's happening if your relative is in the hospital with something like a heart problem and the heart monitor is connected to a Windows PC? Or your lung pumping machine is connected to a Windows PC? Now you have a problem. A, if the Windows PC is connected to the overall hospital network, it can get infected. On the other hand, how can you patch such a PC? Because if it's controlling your heartbeat, it needs to reboot when you patch. So do you want to stop your heartbeat for 30 seconds and doing the reboot? This is a very, very big problem which you have if you're dealing with control systems. Sluices, pumping stations, bridges are properly protected in the Netherlands. If you come to the Netherlands, you will figure out very, very easily that the whole land is something like 2 meters below the waterline, which means that if the dikes protecting this land are open, if the pumping stations are not working or the sluices are open, you will flood the country. And what they had in the past is the mayor of a small city was controlling the pumps. But he wasn't controlling the pumps going to the pump station. He was controlling the pumps from home, connecting to a web page, logging in with some weird credentials, and being able to open up and closing the dikes. And of course, if you have internet connectivity, this opened up the scene for attackers to also try to attack those dikes. Insider charged with hacking California canal system, America's water and power utilities under daily cyber attack. This is a small sign, and it has a wireless access point here. And if you can connect to the wireless access point, you can change the text, and definitely should not say caution, zombies ahead. Cyber attacks caused a power outage in Brazil, and something more Russian welcomes hack attacks against gas system. And then we're waiting for opening the box. In principle, the box has been opened by Stuxnet. We are seeing attacks on control systems every day. So is this bad? We're living in symbiosis with control system. It is bad. On the other hand, and this is my last slide, Richard Clark, which is an advisor to a very big country, he's saying that a good national security advisor would tell the president that the US might able to blow up a nuclear plant somewhere or a terrorist training center somewhere, but a number of countries could strike back with a cyber attack, and the entire US economic system could be crashed in retaliation. I think this is the best news I've ever seen. It's more or less saying the US should not strike anybody because the retaliation via cyber might bring down the whole country. And I think this is the question for all of us. What do we need to do to protect our infrastructure? The infrastructure, energy, oil, traffic, sewage and water, with whom we are living in symbiosis for the last 10 years. What would your life look like if you don't have electricity anymore, no power, no transport, no oil, nothing, no telecommunication? Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll go ahead and go on to the next panelist. Andrea?
So I decided not to use slides because I like to change what I'm going to say based, on the discussion. The mention of Dick Clark's book, Cyberwar. If you've read the book, the red book that talks is on Cyberwar, in the first chapter you find statements where most of the power grid in US are compromised, and these breaches, these time bombs, these logical bombs in the networks could be used for spread blackouts around the US. Now, I don't know if this is true or not for all the operators, but what I can tell you based on experience is that most of the CEOs of those companies, and not only in US, but in many other countries, are not able to answer a very simple question. How do you know your network is secure? So this is the first problem that we have, and I will come back to this point in a minute. I want to share with you an example coming from the electricity community that I think can give us good examples on how to deal with cybersecurity for complex environments, including SCADA, ICS. In Europe, we had an association called UCT, Union for the Coordination of Transmission of Energy. Think of the internet, but from an electricity perspective, so interconnecting networks. Back in the 70s and 80s, the European operators started to interconnect their network to add, more resilience and to allow exchange of electricity between borders. And in order to interconnect their networks, they need to guarantee the safety and security of the operations. That's why they created the Union of the Coordination of Transmission of Energy. This association doesn't exist anymore. Today, over 20 years, it has become the European Agency for regulating the electricity sector. When they started working, the first thing they did, they realized that they were separate companies. 29, when they initially joined, were 19, and then they became 29 members. All their networks were depending on the security of the neighbor networks. And the first thing they had to do was to define standards to guarantee the same level of security across the entire European network. So what they tried to achieve what is called in modern warfare the shared situational awareness. So to have a complete picture of what's going on at European level in the other networks. Now, try to put yourself in their shoes. They didn't want another company to know what was going on in their own company in terms of operations. So they find out a way to share data that were not critical for the privacy and security of the company itself, but enough meaningful to give their neighbors good visibility to keep up with the operations. So they created a peer-to-peer model. So Italy was sharing data only with Albania, with Austria, with Switzerland, and with France, because they have direct connections. And they were exchanging 5 real-time data about their operations. This model has been so successful that the European network is today one of the most reliable power grids that we have in the world. And the Russian ISP's EPS network is now joining the European network, and it will become one single large power grid. There are interesting lessons here that we can learn and apply also in cybersecurity. First is the shared situational awareness. And I wanted to intervene before when we were talking about CERTs, national CERTs, the proactivity or the reactivity of the CERTs. I think that compared to other sectors, in cybersecurity, we are still at the Boy Scout age of organization in terms of coordination when threats have evolved to a real warfare maturity. In particular, we see, and I don't want now to focus on the international dimension, but to the national one that theoretically should be a lot easier. We see that inside the same country or inside the same sector, we don't have the famous indicators that leaders, CEOs, security manager need in order to evaluate which is the real status of security. And in industrial control system and SCADA, this problem is particularly true because we're talking about areas of responsibility, organizational units that historically are very different. I mean, the language, the needs, the technologies used in an industrial control system are very different from IT. Most of the companies that are employing these kind of technologies, electricity production, electricity transmission, electricity distribution, oil and gas, transportation, chemical, pharmaceutical, industrial production, water management system, etc., etc., etc. Most of these companies have a separate security manager, security director for the operations and for the IT. And most of the times, their priorities, their language are different and not compatible. So this is one of the first problems. When we talk to CEOs in those companies and we ask them, which is the status of security? They say, we are investing money. We didn't have any major incident. Therefore, we assume that we are secure. We have a great technical department. We are leveraging our vendors. We bought, the best of breed technology. I want to share with you a couple of examples. So the first example is a huge electricity operator in Europe. They have adopted the typical organization and architecture of the onion. The inner system, the core systems where you have the generators are separated from the traditional IT network where they do billing, call center, web portal, email, etc., etc. And then there's the internet. The core systems, so the production systems are completely separated from the business network. First thing that we found out is that getting closer to a turbo gas, so we're talking about a huge generator, very noisy, very dangerous, where they explained us the architecture. We found a little box with lights on it and the network connection. And we asked, is this for SCADA? I said, no. SCADA is managed in a different way. It's connected to the control center. The control center doesn't have any connection to the internet. Okay, and where does this little box is connected to? Oh, this is for the primary reserve. So for me, it was completely new. What is a primary reserve? Oh, we negotiate with the network operator that in real time, they can tune the generator to balance the network. Turbo gas is essential to keep alive an electricity, a national electricity network, because it's the one that you can tune in real time. You need to balance production and consumption. You can't do it with water, with wind, or with nuclear. You only do it with turbo gas. And this kind of tuning happens in real time. This tuning is so delicate that it's sensitive to 600 milliseconds. So we said, okay, who's going to tell the generator to increase the power or decrease the power? Where is it coming from? From the control center. Oh, no, it's an external company. It's the market regulator or is the market operation company. And they tell us, based on the consumption, the distribution, and the production, how much we have to increase. In real time, less than 600 milliseconds. So to cut the long story short, we found out that this company had a critical connection to the external world. With a third company, they have no control. They have a formal, obviously a formal relationship. This connection, in most cases, is not protected because it's time sensitive. It's a real-time remote control protocol known as 104 or 105. And we simulated with this company an attack where we could turn down the generator, reduce the production of the generator by 20–30%. Try to imagine if a group of people, they organized to attack 5 turbo gas and decrease their production by 30%. You get a blackout. This is an unplanned scenario. Second scenario, a control center in Eastern Europe. We were able to work on the DNS. The DNS, the one to translate a URL, a mnemonic name, www.something.com into an IP address. And this system was used in a SCADA network. Now, this is not a typical component of a SCADA network, but in that specific implementation, DNS was used to translate labels into physical addresses. So if you were switching 2 labels on the DNS that was not considered a critical system, you were essentially exchanging 2 controls. Valve A or sensor A would have become sensor B. And so manipulating the labels could have had a tremendous impact on the operation of that company. Another example, again, on DNS. Again, a component that is not part of the standards or the technologies that you consider part of the industrial control systems. An external fault in the DNS of the service provider caused the interruption, 4 hours of interruption of the distribution of electricity because the control center was relying, it was a bad configuration, but it was relying on an external DNS. They never realized but there was this dependency. And I could go on, with hundreds of examples that demonstrate that these systems are not anymore living in a silo. They are part now of complex infrastructures managed by complex organizations. And we need to accept the different nature. It's not like the physical security that you could manage it in a silo. The only way to manage this properly is to raise the level of the awareness of the top management and bring the topic on the table of the top management. How we did it for 3 of the largest energy companies in Europe. We created an information security or a cybersecurity strategic committee chaired by the CEO of the company. So we empowered the entire management of the company. And we brought them first, which was the situation of cybersecurity. And what happened for the first 6 months, they were not able to produce meaningful reports. They were coming with technical reports that were meaningful for the IT people, but not meaningful for the CEO. The operational guys were coming with reports that were meaningful for the operational guys, but not meaningful for the IT guys. So this simple change allowed the three companies to think differently about cybersecurity and starting bridging the gap from an organizational perspective. Last comment is, it's true that the critical infrastructures have their own interest in protecting their networks. We're talking about their business, but there is also a national interest. So that's where government should play a role. Not necessarily using heavy regulation, but guiding the discussion, the raise of the awareness of the operators and finding common solutions. I can tell you that in this region in particular, there are great examples of governments working wisely and proactively with the private sector, working on standards and regulations that are not felt by the private sector as a useless imposition, but as a good support to improve the security of their companies. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll go ahead and have Faheem. You want to go up and do part?
Thank you, Kevin. I must admit, it doesn't help to be the last speaker on the last panel. It comes with its own advantages and disadvantages. Advantages, Naveen, please stop the time. I'll take all the time that I want. Disadvantage, I get to speak with 1/3 of the audience that was there in the morning. But nevertheless, it's a privilege to be able to speak to you guys, and it's an honor to share this stage, which was set on fire initially by Kevin, and then definitely all the team members built up the inertia during the day. But 6 or 7 hours since morning of information security talk about bad guys, hackers, SCADA systems. I mean, I know it takes its toll. So let me try to break the monotony a bit. So let's start by discussing, I'll leave aside for 2 minutes the talk about information security, and I'll start to discuss about something about the subject of geology. Does anyone like geology? Biology? Theology? Ozone? Okay. This is screen. How many of you noticed this is screen? Did you notice the small bird in this screen? This bird down there? Okay, I'll come to this. It's important for us in the field of information security to notice such a small things in our daily life. I'll get back to this later. The subject of geology. You know, this afternoon when we were taking our lunch and we all felt the sunshine. This region, I come from GCC, I come from UAE, is blessed with lots and lots of sunshine. But sunshine isn't the only thing which sun emanates as part of its various chemical procedures that are happening on it. It also emanates ultra high radiation rays which are called as ultraviolet rays. 99% of these ultraviolet rays are absorbed by a 20-kilometer thick ozone layer. It's ascertained that every 1% decrease in the ozone layer will increase the chances of a skin cancer in humans by 2%. Can someone relate this to information security? Perimeter security sounds similar. So we have a perimeter security in the information security parlance. A bit about biology. Ants have the best attack and defense mechanism. Whenever they sense a threat, somehow they all converge into one area and they try to overpower the threat. This field is called as biomimicry. Scientists are trying to build similar phenomena by creating digital ants. What they are saying is, it's a big paper if you can Google about biomimicry and the digital ants. What they're trying to do is, these ants, digital ants, will traverse all over the physical local area network, leaving behind digital traits, trying to sense the threats and the anomalies which start to happen when an attack is initiated. The end result would be these digital ants will converge and take up the very processors and the memory on which that particular malware will feed upon, in turn giving enough time to those people who are monitoring the infrastructure to go and take the corrective actions. This is the future of anti-malware. And finally, I'll take a bit of time to discuss a bit of theology. Honor thy father and thy mother, the fifth commandment. Similar aspect is repeated in the Quran. And recall when we took the covenant from the children of Israel, do not worship anyone except God, and to parents, do good. Combination of second and fifth commandment. What does this relate to? Policies. Indeed, over you are appointed angels to protect you, kind and honorable, writing down your deeds. Every policy needs to have a monitoring mechanism. If the deeds are not written down, there are chances that the policies will simply remain paper tigers. They will be neglected. Everyone shall taste death. Then to me will be your return. I'll inform you all that about you do. Enforcement. Policies need to be enforced. There has to be a security charter signed by the top government official if you're working for the government, or by the chairman or the CEO of the company, so that we get the enforcement behind which is needed in order to enforce the policies. We all know this. This was the kind of three-tier infrastructure which most of us in the security industry, just about a couple of years ago, were made to deal with. The thing has now grown up. Borders have vanished. My colleagues here who have gone earlier have talked about the threats emanating from the cloud. Those who are in the petroleum industry, I forgot to mention, Kevin said that I'm from a FTSE 100 constituent. Well, I work for Petrofac. Those who are in PDO or similar industries will recognize that this is a typical infrastructure that we have to deal with. We have some cloud-based services who are backhauling into our secure data infrastructure. A lot of it has been said by the previous panel here about the threats and risks associated with clouds. Then we have SCADA systems on our onshore or offshore units. And onshore and offshore units, believe me, in the field of petroleum industry is something which is considered so far away that hardly anybody even considers it as a threat. Then you have branch offices, we have your acquisitions, we have our joint ventures, we have our customers, clients, all of them trying to enter into a high secure zone of our data center. And the most important, the recent phenomena about BYODs, these are consumer-grade devices. Suddenly, we are linking our consumer-grade devices into an enterprise architecture. The people who are into the field of information security need to get their risk methodologies right. Sometimes I have heard that a lot of people use risk, vulnerability, threats in one go interchangeably. Hey guys, there is a difference between a risk and a vulnerability and a threat. Let's get that right. So one other gentleman raised a question as to, we are being taken for a ride by the vendors. We are being taken for a ride by the vendors because we don't know where and how our risk resides and how we need to mitigate them. All risks should not be considered as equal. Risks should be considered with respect to the impact on the business processes that they will have. Recent cyber attacks on Microsoft cloud services, what impact are they going to have upon us? Legal impacts. If the identity of our CEO is stolen and is used to commit a fraud, who is liable for it? Who is going to pay the lawyers to ascertain the fact that it's a fraud committed by an identity theft by, I'm just taking an example, by the exchange that we had hosted on an Office 365 solution. So we need to get our risk methodologies right. I'll continue a bit in a faster pace because it's showing me 0 over there. Stuxnet on SCADA. Not to mention VeriSign admitted that private certificates of 2 companies, J Micro and one more, I think Regaltech, were stolen. The private certificates were stolen. There was a hard-coded username and password from Siemens, which was used as an exploit. But the bottom line remains, 4 zero-day vulnerabilities on Microsoft were also exploited. This was a research done by Gartner and Bitnight. That's where I get the source from. All these Microsoft vulnerabilities, MS-10, 046, 1073, and 1092. If someone takes a bit of a time out to understand what these vulnerabilities were about, for lesser mortals like us and me, I don't understand how to steal somebody's private certificate. That's too much of a technical talk with me. Guys over here like Rahul, who was our friend, probably can help us better to understand that. But what can we do about it? All these vulnerabilities had mitigation factors assigned to them. And some of the most often used mitigation factors are an attacker must have a logon credential and be able to log on locally to exploit the vulnerability. Look at the second vulnerability mitigation factor. Must be able to log on locally. The third vulnerability mitigation factor, fewer user rights on the system could be a less impact than the users with administrative rights. Guys, if you go further, if you think that was in 2010, even today the Microsoft vulnerabilities which are coming out on Windows RT and Windows 8 systems have the same mitigation factors assigned to them, fewer user rights on the system. I'll continue with this. A research shows 100% of the vulnerabilities where the users are not given local administrative rights can be mitigated on Office 2007, 2010, IE8, and IE9. 70% of the vulnerabilities of remote code execution and critical vulnerabilities can be mitigated by taking away the local administrative rights. And 65% of all total Windows 7 critical vulnerabilities can be mitigated. It's so simple. The slide which I missed here, those who are here from Oman CERT, this is the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report for Oman. If you see on the left-hand side, there is a worm by the name of Windows 32 VOBFUS. I don't want to pronounce it because I can't pronounce it, but all I can say is it's VOBFUS, something of that sort. This worm, which is impacting 24.2% of systems being cleaned in Oman, is or can be mitigated by taking user administrative rights away. This does not mean that the worm has brought down critical system. It only shows someone that even in Oman, a lot of users operate with local administrative rights. Kevin, I can see you are getting up. I'm trying to close it out. Be convinced. Machine with user logged in as local administrator is a rogue computer on your network. Microsoft has published solutions. Principle of least privilege applies to Windows. IBM, AIX, those who are using their ERP on AIX systems, get some guys to read these books, Advanced Security Features, Introduction and Configuration. Even those who are on OS X, Mac OS X, they have published a 400-page document on security configuration. How many of us in the security organization are making the operational guys go through the systems hardening? It's a very, very important subject for all of us. And then finally, can I have 5 minutes, Kevin?
No.
Somebody should have said that to you in the morning.
Maybe at the end we'll see. But yeah,
Okay.
Unfortunately, we got to go. Let's get some questions, and we still might.
Okay, fine.
Thanks for that. One of the most important things.
Thank you.
The local user accounts. That's, from a hacking standpoint, that's the first thing we do. We hack into your box, we take local admin, we take over the machine. So absolutely disable local login access. You don't need it in an enterprise architecture. All right, so we're going to do something a little bit different here since we are kind of with the time and everything. We're going to open up the questions to you, and then I'll redirect or do any follow-up questions if we miss any questions from the audience that I think we need to talk about with the critical infrastructure of our esteemed panel here. So we need a microphone. So if we can run the microphone around, who wants to ask a question? What we'll do is when you ask the question, I'll offer it up to the panel, and we'll let each one of them have a brief, succinct answer in response to it. That way they each get to offer their view. Their views all might be the same, but I think they might be a little bit different. So sometimes it's good to hear contrasting views on the actual answer. So let's go ahead and try to get a question up here. Any questions? The microphone.
Hi, Sam Hadi Alamin, Bahrain. Thank you very much, Dr. Stefan and Farhan. The question is that you made it very clear that we have a problem and we had issue. And that's, I've been hearing about it a lot. And always says about patches, do this, do that. I think you have to make sense of here that still, in order to do these patches for something like 2400 machine, it cannot easy. Must be there is certain thing way to do it. And today, the majority of a SCADA system, they don't do that. There is no way. And I think to go to one, you can't do. You always coming back to we to do something, but I think we cannot do without having the proper tool. Question is, what we should do about it? I don't see, as you said, doctor, is that everybody look for simplicity, easy, and most of the things, the idea was, SCADA are run by engineers. In USA, I was there in the Rockwell convention. When I said IT, they look at me, what are you doing here? This is engineering conference. Am I right? I mean, this is the problem we have all the time. So question is, I'm looking for an answer, looking for this, putting the policies, we have it. Putting getting the vulnerability patches, we have it. Applying is not easy because vendors don't do that. And that's where we have the problem. So I think you're looking at the wrong people here. We need someone to do that. And I think the vendors are already, who actually have those, they're not doing their job. Thank you.
Stefan?
Yeah, you're hitting exactly on the spot. You see control systems and IT systems. And your controls experts were taking their control system and moving them into IT world without looking at security. I can't tell you what the perfect solution is, but I can tell you what we are doing. So we have 120 different control systems, small control systems, few PLCs, few screens, few sensors. Big control systems are 500 servers, something like 2,000 or 2 million data points, and then lots of screens. You've seen some of those ones. So what have we done? We have tried to bring together the IT department and the controls department. So instead of dealing with controls and IT, we're dealing now with both together. The network for control systems are dealt with the IT department. The Windows PCs for the control systems are dealt with the IT department. Linux installation dealt with IT department. I personally do not believe, and I come from the field, I know the arguments pro and cons. I don't believe that patching 400 servers is difficult. We have a computer center of 10,000 servers. If I want to, I can make it updated, rebooted within 2 hours. For control systems, I believe one can do the same when and if one designs control systems in a way that you can do the patching, in a way of you got redundancy, so you can patch one, you can do the testing, and then you can toggle to the patch system. So for me, moving control system to the IT world means also moving IT security onto the controls world. I believe in patching. I believe in antivirus software. We're even able to patch oscilloscopes. The oscilloscope picture which I've shown there, it's part of our WSUS Microsoft installation server. We're installing we're patching the oscilloscopes as we patch Office PCs. The only difference is Office PCs, we force the patches. So if there's Patch Tuesday, patches are forced. Oscilloscopes have an owner. So your experts might be a control system expert, might be an owner. He's getting an information saying the patch is due. You have now your time span to apply the patches according to your schedule, and he's assuming the responsibility for the security of this system. So there is availability, functionality, maintainability, and the security is going together. So what I believe in is moving control system experts and IT experts together, making them talk together so you can improve security of the overall.
Right, yeah. Okay, good. Andrea, you want to?
I'm perfectly aligned. I think that we have seen that patching in the SCADA and ICS systems simply is not working. And it could create an alibi because the operational guys could say, this patch is not applicable, we couldn't test it, and that's the end of the discussion. You live with the vulnerability. I think the wise approach is when IT and the operational guys risk aware together, they find an alternative solution. And I've lived this on my skin with companies after Stuxnet came out, and some of them, they couldn't apply the patches, but they were aware. And second, they work all together to first bring the decisions to the top management. What do? Do we suspend the service for a few hours and then we patch the systems, or we can leave with this risk, but we mitigated that. And for example, this company I'm referring to decided not to patch the systems for a few months, but they were monitoring what was going on in real time, looking for any clue, put together some mitigation strategies in order to reduce the impact and to avoid the spread. They tested Stuxnet in the lab. It's completely different from a company where they say, I'm sorry, the patch is not applicable, I won't do that. I want just to share a simple example of a government working exactly in this space. Because here, what we need to induce is a risk-wise, a risk-aware approach to applying controls. The problem is that most of the companies are not able to do a good overall risk management. On the other side, if you use the approach of NERC, FERC in US, a checklist of controls could be even worse. We have seen no real increase in security, but for sure a lot more costs and headaches to the companies. I'm working closely with two governments that decided that first to give the private sector a list of controls where they say you should do A, B, and C, and D, but it's not, they're not all mandatory. Companies have the choice to explain to the government why they cannot apply that control and give a good explanation. And if the explanation is good, they will accept non-compliance. We have found that this approach is forcing companies not to be simply compliant blindly to a standard, but to start thinking and discussing internally between the different departments the implications, the countermeasures, and the workarounds.
Okay, good. And Faheem, you want to add anything?
Just a quick point. I appreciate when Dr. Stefan says that we need to align IT with OT, and there's no reason why on 2,000 machines patches can't be applied. But coming from a background where there are operational difficulties in going to the sites which are so far away, completely out of information security governance, there I think you should try to mitigate certain risks by looking at a control which is known as application whitelisting, or OS hardening for that matter, which will reduce a risk to a certain extent but not completely mitigate it. And then again, as part of your executive board meeting management dashboard, tell them that, hey guys, we have done this much, this is the residual risk, please accept it. That's how I do it.
Okay, good. Any other questions? It's like, it's late in the day. Okay, I think I want to thank the panelists and everything for coming up. One of the things you have to realize is there are things we can do to defend our networks, all right? So application whitelisting was mentioned. That's a much more effective technique than user account control, which we have in Windows 7, because that always comes up. Application whitelisting, you can say, enter a username and password with administrator access to be able to run this program or install this software. It's much more effective than user account control. Patches, unfortunately, the patch system we have is all we have. It's a broken system, no doubt about it. It's a broken system, but you still have to put your patches on, all right? And I talked to one of the panelists from tomorrow, and we was talking on one of the breaks, and what we want you to understand especially is everybody loves to go order and get, and I do this for a living too, is pen testing. More important than getting a penetration test is getting guidance, if you need it, in hardening your systems. Harden your systems so as the guidelines that was mentioned, the different hardening guides. makes you a difficult target. Why? Statistics from the actual Verizon 2012 data breach report. We're waiting on 2013. 97% of the attacks were not that difficult. Basic security controls would have blocked 97% of the attacks in 2011. We're waiting to see what it's going to be like in 2012. All right? One of the things to remember is we've mentioned the local user account. Another thing is don't surf the internet as an administrative user. If you surf the internet as an administrative user, that's giving administrative access to the actual attacker who's downloading the malware or those types of things. All right? The other thing is the days are over. We live in a different world. Don't leave your client side, your inside networks machines on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week unless you have to. Okay? We know there's going to be vulnerabilities. There's no way to get around not having those vulnerabilities. If you leave your machines up, your client machine goes out to the internet, clicks on that link, downloads that piece of malware, and what's it going to do? Send data out to the internet. And that's number 2, egress filtering. Look at that outbound traffic. That outbound traffic, all malware, when it plants on a system, phones home, establishes that connection to the botnet. So if you start looking at that outbound or egress filtering, you can mitigate a lot of these attacks. So there are things we can do to defend. I mean, it's very important that we do that. We look at that outbound traffic. And another thing on that is a server. What's a server for? Serving, right? Standing there and letting clients connect to it. So your server should never initiate a connection to the internet. If it does, you've been compromised. If your servers are talking to the internet, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. That's very simple things we can put in place. And the last thing I'll use before we end the session in the actual conference for today is when you select that application or you select that protocol and you run it, you've just accepted every vulnerability on that protocol for its life. From the time you install it to the time you either uninstall it or upgrade or do whatever, you've accepted the vulnerabilities of that software. Unfortunately, we're not in a perfect world. Software always has vulnerabilities, and we're all in it together. So make sure you look at your different vulnerabilities and mitigate the risk of that using some of the techniques we talked about during this panel. Okay?
Can I just add one comment? We have been talking about technology, but let's not forget that the biggest vulnerabilities are in people and processes. And I mean, this doesn't come from literature, it comes from real experience. 1.5 years ago, we did an assessment of an energy company. Their control center, from a technical perspective, was very, very, very well protected. I could say a technical best practice. Then, the very last day, we looked at a little system called day-ahead forecasting. That system, technically speaking, was fully protected. The day-ahead forecasting is the system that defines the needs for the day ahead, and it's based to decide the route of electricity. So it's an important component of a core process. Now, that system was fed through data that were coming from a fax machine. So because they were buying energy from Russia, and they didn't have an electronic validated link with Russia, the Russian operator was sending every evening a fax with, tomorrow I will send you this amount of megawatts on line A, this amount of megawatts in these hours on line B, and there was a manual process. So even if the technology there was perfect, I could have spoofed a fax transmission with fake data, and I would have compromised the operation of the Baltic countries just for a process vulnerability.
Oh yeah, definitely, and unfortunately, you always got to manage the human factor. We can have the best security in the world, but if they leave the door wide open, they're going to walk through the door. They're not going to sit there and try to go through all our security controls. Okay, I think that's going to finish it. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m.